A 1913 family picnic photo hides a chilling horror. Among the trees in the background hangs a lynched body, yet the family keeps smiling for the camera. Who was that man, and why was this murder never reported? In dusty corners of old shops and forgotten estate sales, old photographs often turn up. These pictures carry stories that time tried to hide. Today we'll look at one photo from 1913. It seems like a nice family picnic, but it holds dark secrets that have scared people for many years. What looks like a happy family day in Pennsylvania becomes something much worse when you know what to look for. This story is about watching closely. It's about the things we miss, and it's about how the past won't stay buried. The morning of September 15th, 2019 started normal for Margaret Chen. She was 34 years old and sold old things in Philadelphia. The fall air felt crisp as she walked through an estate sale. The sale was for Evelyn Hartwell, who had died recently. Evelyn lived alone in an old Victorian house for over 60 years. Margaret had worked in this business long enough to spot hidden treasures. She moved carefully through rooms full of old stuff, furniture covered in dust sheets, books with yellow pages, and countless photos scattered on tables like fallen leaves. That's where she found it. The picture didn't look special at first. It was a brown-toned photo about 8 by 10 inches. It was mounted on thick cardboard like photos from the early 1900s. The scene showed what looked like a family picnic. 7 people sat on a checkered blanket under big oak trees. The women wore long white dresses with high collars. Their hair was pinned up in the style popular in 1913. The men wore dark suits even though it looked warm. Their hats sat carefully beside them on the blanket. Writing on the back in faded brown ink said, "Family Picnic. Brandywine Woods, June 1913. Remember this day always." Margaret bought the photo for $15. She liked how it looked and the quality of the print. She had a regular customer, Dr. James Morrison. He was a history teacher at the University of Pennsylvania who collected old American photos. She thought he might want to add it to his collection. 3 days later, Margaret sat in Dr. Morrison's messy office. Tall bookshelves and framed old papers surrounded them. The professor was in his early 60s with wire glasses and gray hair. He looked at the photo through a magnifying glass, like a detective studying evidence. "Interesting piece," he said quietly, adjusting his glasses. "The clothing and photo methods match the date. Brandywine Woods. That area has quite a history." He paused. His magnifying glass stopped over part of the photo's background. His face changed. The casual interest became something more focused, more worried. "Margaret, do you have a stronger magnifying glass? Or better yet, could we scan this at high quality?" 20 minutes later, they huddled around Dr. Morrison's computer screen. They looked at a digital copy of the photo blown up to 300%. What they saw in the background made Margaret catch her breath. There, barely visible among the oak trees about 50 feet behind the picnic family, hung what looked like a human figure. The image was dark and hard to see, but the shape was clear, arms in strange positions, head tilted at an impossible angle, hanging from a thick branch by what looked like rope. "Dear God," Margaret whispered. Her hand moved to cover her mouth. Dr. Morrison leaned back in his chair. He took off his glasses to clean them with shaking hands. "This could be a trick of light and shadow," he said, but he put his glasses back on and leaned forward again. "The positioning, the angle of the limbs, it matches." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Margaret stared at the image, her mind raced. "They had to have known," she said quietly. "The family in the picture, they had to have seen it." "Not necessarily," Dr. Morrison replied, but his voice didn't sound convinced. In 1913, photographers often took several minutes to set up their shots. The exposure time was longer if this happened during the photo. But even as he spoke, both of them could see the truth in the family's faces when they looked closely. The smiles seemed forced now, strained. The children's eyes held a sadness that hadn't been clear in their first quick look. Most telling was how the adults were positioned. They all faced away from the trees, their bodies angled toward the camera on purpose, as if they were trying not to look toward the woods behind them. Dr. Morrison spent the next 2 weeks researching where the photo came from. He contacted other teachers, he searched old records, he looked through local newspaper files from 1913. What he found painted a disturbing picture of that time and place. In June 1913, Chester County, Pennsylvania was struggling with money problems and social tensions. Many immigrant workers had moved there looking for railroad jobs. This created friction with families who had lived there for generations. Local newspapers from that time documented a series of incidents. They showed harassment and violence directed at new arrivals, especially those from Southern and Eastern Europe. On June 18, 1913, just 3 days after Dr. Morrison estimated the photo date, the Chester County Daily reported finding a body in Brandywine Woods. The victim was Stefan Kowalski, a 23-year-old Polish immigrant who worked on railroad construction. The article was buried on page 4 between ads for medicines and farm equipment. It gave few details. The death was called an accident and the case closed quickly. Dr. Morrison found Stefan's immigration records at Ellis Island. He had arrived in America just 8 months before his death. He traveled alone with plans to earn enough money to bring his wife and baby daughter from Poland. Letters found among his things were written in Polish and translated by authorities. They spoke of his hope for a better life. They also told of harsh treatment he received from some local residents. The family in the photo proved harder to identify. The Victorian house where Margaret found the picture had belonged to the Hartwell family for 3 generations. Evelyn Hartwell, the recently dead owner, was the granddaughter of Thomas Hartwell. He was a wealthy merchant who owned significant property in Chester County in the early 1900s. Thomas Hartwell's name appeared in several places in Dr. Morrison's research. He was a member of the local business group. He had publicly opposed the railroad expansion. He cited concerns about undesirable elements being brought into the community. He had also been among a group of important citizens who pressured local law enforcement. They wanted a harder stance on what they called vagrancy and public disturbances, language that at the time was widely understood to target immigrant workers. The more Dr. Morrison learned about Thomas Hartwell, the more convinced he became. The family in the photo was the Hartwell family, and they had not simply witnessed Stefan Kowalski's death, they had helped cause it. Margaret found herself unable to stop thinking about the photo. She would wake in the middle of the night. The image burned into her memory. During the day, she caught herself staring at customers in her shop. She wondered what secrets they might be carrying, what horrible truths might be hidden behind their everyday faces. She began having what she could only describe as episodes. Standing in her shop, surrounded by things that belonged to dead people, she would suddenly feel overwhelmed. The weight of all the untold stories pressed down on her, all the secrets that had died with their keepers. The old things that had once excited her now seemed scary. Each item was a potential witness to forgotten crimes and buried guilt. Dr. Morrison, meanwhile, struggled with the right thing to do about their discovery. As a historian, he felt he should document and preserve evidence of past injustices. But as a human being, he wrestled with knowing that exposing this truth would devastate the descendants of everyone involved. 3 weeks after their initial discovery, Dr. Morrison got a phone call that changed everything. The caller said she was Anna Kowalski Martinez, the great-granddaughter of Stefan Kowalski. She had been researching her family history. She had come across Dr. Morrison's name connected to questions about her great-grandfather's death. They met the next day at a small cafe near the university. Anna was a woman in her 40s, a high school teacher with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She carried a manila folder containing what remained of her family's records of Stefan's life and death. "My great-grandmother never spoke about what happened," Anna explained, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "She came to America 2 years after Stefan died, bringing my grandmother with her. They settled in Pittsburgh, changed their name, tried to forget. But some things don't stay forgotten. She opened the folder and took out a letter written in Polish on thin, yellowed paper. This was among my great-grandmother's things when she died. I had it translated a few years ago. Dr. Morrison read the translation. His face grew pale. The letter was dated September 1913. It was from a Polish immigrant who had worked alongside Stefan. It described threats Stefan had received from local residents. His fear in the weeks before his death, the writer's belief that Stefan had been murdered. Most chilling, the letter mentioned that Stefan had been invited to a gathering by Thomas Hartwell the day before his body was found. Stefan had viewed this invitation with suspicion but felt unable to refuse. There were others, Anna continued, other workers who disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances. The authorities didn't investigate because they didn't care. These people were considered expendable. When Dr. Morrison showed Anna the photograph, her reaction was immediate and strong. She pulled back from the image as if it had physically hit her. That's him, she whispered, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. I've seen pictures of my great-grandfather. That's Stefan in the background. The three of them, Margaret, Dr. Morrison, and Anna, sat in the cafe as the afternoon light faded. They struggled with the weight of their discovery. The photograph was evidence of a hate crime that had gone unpunished, a murder that had been covered up by those in power and forgotten by history. But it was also something more. It was proof of the casual cruelty that ordinary people can show when they view others as less than human. The family in the photograph had not only witnessed Stefan's death, they had turned it into a twisted form of entertainment. They posed for a commemorative picture with his body hanging in the background like a horrible decoration. Anna decided to go public with the photograph and the story it revealed. Working with Dr. Morrison and a local journalist, she helped expose not just Stefan's murder. She also revealed the broader pattern of violence and intimidation that had characterized how immigrant workers were treated in Chester County during that period. When the story broke, it sent shockwaves through the local community. Descendants of the families involved reacted with everything from shame and horror to denial and anger. Some welcomed the chance to acknowledge and make up for their ancestors' crimes. Others became defensive, claiming the photograph had been misunderstood or faked. The Hartwell family's surviving members found themselves at the center of the controversy. Some publicly apologized for their ancestors' actions. They worked with Anna to establish a memorial for Stefan and other victims of the violence. Others refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. They insisted that Thomas Hartwell had been a respected member of the community who would never have been involved in such activities. Margaret discovered that owning the photograph had changed her in ways she was still trying to understand. The antique business that had once brought her joy now felt different. Every old photograph, every piece of family memorabilia carried the potential for hidden darkness. She found herself questioning not just the objects she bought and sold, but the nature of memory itself. We like to think that the past stays in the past, she said during one of several interviews she gave about the discovery. We imagine that time softens the edges of old wounds, that distance makes everything somehow easier to accept, but this photograph proves that's not true. Some wounds don't heal, some crimes don't fade, they just wait, patient and persistent for someone to look closely enough to see them. Dr. Morrison used the photograph as the centerpiece of a larger research project. He examined lynchings and hate crimes in early 20th century Pennsylvania. His work revealed that Stefan's death had not been an isolated incident. It was part of a broader pattern of violence that had been systematically covered up or ignored by authorities of the time. History is written by the victors, he noted in his published paper on the subject, but sometimes the truth survives in unexpected places. A photograph intended to commemorate cruelty becomes evidence of it. A family's proud moment becomes their shame. The dead refuse to stay silent forever. The photograph itself was eventually donated to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It became part of an exhibit on hate crimes and racial violence in America. Anna insisted that it be displayed alongside information about Stefan's life, not just his death. His dreams of bringing his family to America, his struggle to learn English, his hope for a better future that was cut short by hatred and fear. Standing before the display case containing the photograph, visitors often spend long minutes studying the image. Some focus on the family in the foreground, trying to understand how ordinary people could participate in such extraordinary evil. Others find their eyes drawn inevitably to the background, to the barely visible figure among the trees, to the evidence of a crime that took over a century to acknowledge. The inscription on the back of the photograph, "Remember this day always," had taken on a meaning that Thomas Hardwell could never have intended. The day was indeed remembered, but not as a celebration of power and cruelty. Instead, it became a reminder of the importance of bearing witness, of looking closely at the evidence before us, and of never allowing the victims of hatred to be forgotten. Anna Kowalski-Martinez continued her research into her family's history, but she also began working with organizations dedicated to documenting and preventing hate crimes. She spoke at schools and community centers. She used the photograph and Stefan's story to illustrate the human cost of prejudice and the importance of standing up for those who are marginalized and vulnerable. "My great-grandfather came to America seeking the same thing most immigrants seek," she would tell her audiences. Opportunity, safety, a chance to build a better life for his children. He found hatred instead, but his story doesn't end with his death. It continues with our responsibility to ensure that such crimes are never forgotten, never repeated, never accepted as simply the way things were. The photograph continues to generate discussion and controversy. Online forums debate its authenticity, its interpretation, and its significance. Some argue that it's impossible to definitively identify the figure in the background or to prove the family's complicity. Others maintain that the historical context and documentary evidence make the truth undeniable. But perhaps the most important legacy of the photograph is not the debates it has sparked or the historical record it has corrected. Perhaps its greatest significance lies in the questions it forces us to ask about ourselves and our own time. What would we have done in 1913? What are we doing now? What horrors are we witnessing and ignoring? What photographs will be taken today that future generations will study with horror and disbelief? Margaret Chen still owns her antique shop in Philadelphia, but her relationship with the objects she sells has been forever changed. She approaches each piece with a deeper awareness of the stories it might hold, the secrets it might reveal. She has become, in her own words, a guardian of memory. She ensures that the stories of the past, both beautiful and terrible, are not lost to time. The Victorian house where the photograph was found was eventually sold to a young family with 2 small children. They were unaware of its connection to the photograph or the events it documented. On warm summer evenings, their children play in the backyard. Their laughter echoes through the same trees that once witnessed Stefan Kowalski's final moments. Time moves forward, carrying us all toward an uncertain future, but some images, some stories, some truths refuse to be buried. They wait in dusty corners and forgotten boxes, patient and persistent, ready to emerge when someone finally looks closely enough to see what has always been there, hidden in plain sight among the shadows and the trees. The photograph from 1913 serves as a stark reminder that the past is never truly past, that the dead speak to us across the years, and that our responsibility to bear witness to injustice transcends the boundaries of time itself. In the end, it asks us a simple but profound question. When we look at the world around us, what are we choosing to see and what are we choosing to ignore? And in a dusty corner of some future antique shop, what photographs of our own time wait to be discovered? Their hidden truths ready to shock and shame the generations that come after us? The cycle continues, the witnesses wait, and the reckoning, delayed but never denied, approaches with the inevitable patience of justice itself.